Well, hi all, I'm Jordan Mathieson, Program Manager at Microsoft. Today we're going to go through what's new in Visual Studio 2022 for Mac, and do a little bit of an overview as well for folks who may not be familiar. I'm going to go heavy demo, because that's always a lot more fun, I think. But I'll just tee up a little bit as far as the reminders on the surveys. I'm going to do a version of this same talk at the Orlando event coming up in a bit, so I'd love to get feedback on the approach and kinds of things that you'd like to see covered in these, so that help me keep iterating on that.
When's Orlando?
Orlando, I think first week or so in November. All right, so first a little bit about myself. I'm going to date myself, but I've been a software developer since 1998, and I've worked with .NET since it was like in betas of .NET all the way through to today. I worked outside of Microsoft, and I've only been at Microsoft only for just over 10 years now. So in my time at Microsoft, I've worked across the various developer tools, starting first with JavaScript tooling in VS and JavaScript mobile tooling in VS Code. I do a bit of work with the new Microsoft DevBox service now, and then I've been on VS Mac for 5 years, as long as it's been a product here at Microsoft. A little bit on the fun side of me, I've got 4 kids at home, and we've got 3 dogs, a couple rabbits, and my wife and I have a lot of fun out in our garden with them and tag teaming on those things. I personally have a love of music. I enjoy something in just about every genre of music out there. I can find something I like, and I've been learning guitar for also about 5 years, as long as I've been on VS Mac. I bring that up because I've actually found a way to bring my love of the music stuff into my presentation today as well. That kind of got me a little more excited, kept me up late a few nights now, like, oh, can I pull this together? So as we go along, let's also feel free to chime in. I want to make it interactive too, so it doesn't need to just be me throwing out questions. If you have a question as we go along, raise your hand, let me know. So real quick, I've just got 2 slides of just some overview info, and then we'll go look at the product. VS for Mac, this is our .NET IDE for developers on the Mac. It's for working with like .NET, supports .NET Core 3.1 up through .NET 6, and we've got .NET 7 preview support, focused on supporting users building web, cloud, mobile, and games on the Mac. There's some Azure integration as well, like Azure Functions has some tooling in there, the ability to publish your web projects to Azure. And this is included in your subscription for Visual Studio. So if you're in a company that's got a license of Visual Studio, or you're using Visual Studio Community, same exact thing for VS for Mac. It's the same licensing. You can get access to VS for Mac the same as if you've got access to Visual Studio, you could try out VS for Mac as long as you've got a Mac. We are now in our, I guess you'd say, 3rd major release of Visual Studio for Mac. So Visual Studio 2022 for Mac. Behind the scenes, this is version 17.0. We've now lined up our version numbers to match with Windows. Makes it easier, addresses some confusion people had about how they, which is which. So we've got the same version numbering as Visual Studio. And the big focus in this release was addressing customer feedback around performance of the IDE, the look and feel of the IDE. That was really the core of what we did in enabling .NET 6 development. So we've got, we went and swapped out both the front end of the IDE, it's all in native Mac OS UI, and we swapped out the back end architecture as well, and we run on top of .NET 6 now. And a fun detail, because I often get asked this about how we make a native Mac UI on .NET 6, because the IDE is fully managed code all the way up. We use the same underlying technology as Xamarin.Mac. I forget the exact name of it right now, but basically sort of like projections over Mac API, so that you can build out, stay in managed code, but build out a native Mac OS UI. Now, a big thing in this release was also support for Apple's new M1 or Apple Silicon processors, ARM64 processors. So I'm running one of these devices right here. This was an original M1 MacBook Air. I'm going to dive right in and just show you an example of sort of performance differences. So we're going to take this project, eShop on Web, and I want to show you, whoa, PowerPoint was doing this earlier. We don't need it right now. And I'm going to show you first opening this solution on Visual Studio 2019. That was the previous release. So for fun, we're going to let you look at the dock, and you can see the icon bouncing. And this will give me some time to chat a little bit more about what we did. So that work of moving to .NET 6 at a base level also did a lot of just swapping out the whole I/O stack, which was a big piece of lots of little bits of time spent on just a whole different way of doing file I/O behind the scenes, in addition to all of the native UI up front, lending itself to adding up to, in many cases on these devices, like over 50% improvement in like solution time, load time alone. It's just something on this project here, but you see how long it took there, and now we can get to coding. Now I want to compare this time. So here's the old UI. We're not going to spend any more time here today than what you're seeing right now, but here's the old product. And now I want to go and switch over to show you the same solution loading in 2022. So I'm going to go and say open with, and this will be the stable version. And I should barely have time to get my cursor down. There was no bump, no little bounce on the dock. The IDE loaded. Now we're going to get in, and I can go ahead and click here and start coding away. And that's a nice quick example on this one project that eShop on Web's been around a while. It's one of my favorite little sample apps, and it's a moderately complex one. It's not as simple as a getting started like a file new template. It's got a little bit more going on to it, and you can see the difference in that alone. If you look at some of the types of solution sizes we see from some of our customers, you can imagine how this might expand out. Even to our own code. VS for Mac is written all in managed code, and we write it in VS for Mac itself. So for our own team's productivity, we saw some nice gains right away in loading the behemoth that is the IDE source code. So that's the highest level. Now I mentioned that some folks are coming into this chat. I'm hoping to also have as an actual bit of a chat. So if you have questions, feel free to ask as we go throughout, and we'll jump in. Does anybody have anything so far? We're gonna just stay in the IDE now and look around. Okay. So I mentioned earlier I've got a love of music, and one project I've been working on is a chord calculator. So I don't know how many people are all familiar with music, but music is made up of a series of notes, and a chord is usually a set of 2 or more notes all played at the same time. And so I'm learning a little bit. I'm not into music theory, but interested. So I thought, it's all about patterns, and I know patterns, and I've got, as a programmer, I love that stuff. So I decided to work on my own little fun time project to help me calculate what's in a chord and use it to learn. So this is the very earliest stage. This is actually not at all a trustworthy source of music theory. But I could first go in and clone from my Git repo. Though we've got a new clone dialog, kind of a simplified one. I could go to the website and clone straight from GitHub. Today I'm going to just open it up for the sake of speed, this local version that I have here. And I'll show you the very bare basics of the program, and then we'll dive into talking on what's new in the IDE. So, it's already loaded. We'll open up a source code file. So actually, first on the general IDE, changes to it if you've seen it before. If you haven't, VS for Mac is similar to Visual Studio on Windows in this concept of having tool windows around the IDE. You can use for unit testing. You can see your errors down along the bottom. You can customize these windows wherever you want to put them. So like the solution window I can take and move over to the right side if I like that model and am used to it from Visual Studio on Windows. And if you go really old school, we used to have properties open all the time, and I can dock those down here. This interface of dragging and dropping onto these icons to pick your placement is actually something new we put as we had to redesign the tool window system for this release of VS for Mac. So we actually brought in these same hints in the UI to make it easier for docking your windows and kind of help bring that familiar experience from the Visual Studio family. I may have stumbled on a bug for a moment there. There we go, okay. I can collapse my windows down. I have the freedom to kind of move these around in different ways that I want. Another change in our menus too is if you used VS for Mac for a while is that we've aligned these top level menus here in the windows. Before VS for Mac had some menus that came from our history of coming from Xamarin Studio, and it was a little different if you came from Visual Studio on Windows. So we've done work to unify these menus like build and project and Git. They're like the same commands you would use over on the Windows side, make it easier to flow between the IDEs. So if we jump into source code here, this is my very basic, I like when I'm developing stuff, I like a minimal approach of the bare bones of what I need first, and then I build up over time to more of an architecture as I need it. So I've got my bare bones program here. This is a very simple console app to let me pass in the name of a chord, and then it'll spit out, say, 3 notes in the chord. So if I wanted to know The G major chord, it tells me it's got notes G, B, and D in that. And that's it. That's all this does right now. I was running in a terminal window in the IDE. And so we have an integrated terminal here where I can go and don't have to leave the comfort of the IDE. I can just pop it open with a keyboard shortcut, same one as in VS Code. And let's say I like to stay on the keyboard for doing my Git commands. I can say I can set us up a new branch for the demo today. And we're just going to add a whole bunch of front-end UIs on top of this chord generator app. And so I'll check out and create and check out that branch, and you'll see in the title of the solution window here, it'll change. Oh no, I'm actually not in the repo. Let me fix that. There we go. Now we should see it switched up here, and so this shows us the name of the branch I'm currently on. This is to tee up a little bit more, though. In the future, we're working toward like a branch selector in the status bar. In this release, we've introduced a new status bar region down here at the bottom of the IDE, whereas before, status showed up in the top of the IDE more like Xcode. So if I run a build here, I see my build status is popping up along the bottom. If I had an error in my code, I'm just hitting the Command K shortcut to build. Then I get a summary of the errors that were here, and I could look in the solution window and understand, be able to navigate around, fix the error message. So that status bar, now that that's introduced in the IDE, we're looking at how we bring more of those kinds of familiar experiences for the status bar, say from Windows or maybe even VS Code. Those are kind of areas to tee up where we're looking in the future. While I'm here, there's one thing I do want to change, which is, like I mentioned, I've been with .NET for a long time, so I actually am really familiar with the way we used to do console apps by default, where it was a class with a main method, and instead of the new style of top-level statements. So when I got up and running, I left the top-level statements in this code. But let's say I wanted to change those around. There's a new refactoring here for converting it to the program.main style. This is something added in Roslyn, which is the analysis engine powering our tooling for C# and Visual Studio, VS Code, Visual Studio for Mac. So VS Mac is seeing this refactoring choice that was just added, I think in this new 17.3 releases this week. And I can see here on the right is a preview of what changes this will make to my code, so I can see if I want them before I apply them. And then I can go back to the classic program.main style of writing a console app. I show that because if you've been using VS for Mac for a while, before the 2022 release, we also had that preview refactoring window had gone away. So there are reasons on the old UI framework that we had to cut it for a while. So that's like an example of something new that's back. But this whole window itself now will list out multiple refactorings if you've got several that apply to a line. You can filter on them by typing to jump down to the one you want and hit enter to apply it. And that's kind of a quick example of something new. Okay, now another thing you'll see here is I like to use to-do lists to kind of keep track of my punch list of what I want to do with this project. And to go with that, I've always been a longtime fan of using the built-in task list in the IDE. This I call out because it just came back in this latest release of Visual Studio for Mac. We had to remove it for 17.0 as we're working on the new native UI, so there's a new thing that's in the release that just came out this week, actually. And I can use that and jump around. Let's say I see that I already did the work here to output the chord, so I can remove that line. I'll call that out too, because long-time feature that many of us take for granted, but if you're new to the IDEs, you might not realize that the to-do list is sitting there. Now let's see, which one do I want to? Let's take a look at a little bit of unit test support. So this unit testing in VS for Macs, I will admit it's not as full-featured as on Windows. It's pretty basic level right now. It's an area we'll be looking, focusing on improving maybe in the year ahead or so. But it helps me at kind of the bare bones level of use the programming style I like, which is test-driven development, where you write your test first and it fails because you didn't actually implement all the code yet. You go write the backing code to make the test go green, and then you refactor as you see fit. So I like to back my code with unit tests. And so here I can run all these tests. I already know because I've been working on this a bit, that I've got one failure here around this one method about the get E minor chord. That one was because I have not yet done the work to actually support minor chords in my code. So all this can do is support like a major chord right now. If you're not familiar with music, that's just a different style of, you could have a E major or E minor chords. They sound different, they mean different things. I've coded mine only to this one thing called a major chord right now, so it's not gonna work. So we can change this test around to say that I expect it to fail. And just say, I expect this is gonna throw an exception. So you see our IntelliSense window here as I go. This was driven by the same engine as on Visual Studio. So the editor in VS for Mac is actually, at its core, the same editor as on Visual Studio on the Windows side. And so you're seeing the same suggestions you'd see if you were working on this code over on that product as well. And then I'm going to hit Command-T, which will run the test I was just writing, and we'll see if this time the test succeeds because I expect it to fail. So successful tests, and that one that I ran says it's successful. So there's just a quick little bit of an idea around some level of test support in the IDE. Now say I wanted to work on adding in the minor chord in this. I could go ahead and command click here on my get major chord function and come on into the logic of this chord generator. If you are into music theory, no judgment please. It's extremely rough right now. But suffice it to say, when you work with like getting a chord, it always starts with some kind of you're starting with the same base set of 7 notes. And there's these things that are sharps and flats in between. There's our old friend C sharp sitting in here. And it's just a pattern amidst those. So you get what is the G major scale. If I pass in a G major, it gives me the scale, which is this combination of notes that meets a certain pattern of their distance between each other. And then in this case, I just write out these first, third, and fifth indexes into that list is kind of how you get this triad of a chord. As I'm learning a bit more about music theory, I learned some stuff that I may not have had my terminology right here. So for example, I called it the root note. I'm seeing in some places where this could actually be called the unison, I believe. So I could hit the Command R I just chose to do a rename refactor, and we'll change my source up to maybe use the right name as I'm learning about this. Let me zoom in a little more in this part. Down here, when I first wrote this, I just said, I know that I want to pull out 8 different notes that I'll use to construct what is a chord. I'm learning they actually have names like interval instead of scale note. So I may want to change up my code here to be more accurate again. And here's another feature that I'm going to show, which is the subword navigation. So if you haven't seen this on Windows, let's also do one other thing because I think it's easier to see on these. What do you think, light mode or dark mode right now? Any preferences? I'll leave it at this, but I was going to jump over and show you that we have the ability to change up the theme now in the IDE. Can pull from whatever the OS says, or you can override it to be light or dark. I found it a little easier earlier to go with light, but if I do that to everybody right now, I'm going to blind you, so I'm going to leave that alone. But I mentioned subword navigation, so on the Mac, if I hold down Option and like Shift, I can select the whole word. On Windows, this is the same as like Control Shift. Well, in programming, we have these camel casing things where I might want to actually select just the, we're going to have to quit this one right now. It's getting in the way of keyboard shortcuts. I might want to just select portions of this text. So if I hold down Control Option Shift, I'm now able to select these camel cased words within the variable. This is new on the Windows side as well if you use Visual Studio on Windows. So here I can go ahead and select a portion of my text. I could do this anywhere, say, let's click up here. PowerPoint is really not wanting to be a friend today. And I hit Control Option Shift, and here I'm selecting portions of the variable. It's really handy for moving around, or in this case, I know I want to change up everything from scale note to use the word interval. So I'm going to hit and select just scale note. And then I'm going to use the thing called multi-carets. I got to remind myself of the keyboard shortcut. Option Shift dot. as I hit Option Shift Dot, I can select everywhere that it says scale note. And now I can go ahead and change all these at once to say interval, and then commit my changes. Multi-cursors are really fun. I will admit I don't have the experience, probably many of you even have with these in, say, like Visual Studio Code or on Windows, but they have the ability to set a whole bunch of cursors that can actually move together. So I could move up and down in this file and keep a range of these cursors. I could now edit up and say, I just want to call these int. And when I went up and down, I just lost some selections, so that's why not everything changed quite right, but let's put that back. And now I've made this change, and let's just go see that the unit tests still work to back of the refactoring I just did. And should show everything as successful. And we'll even use a right-click gesture and like run the whole set of tests and be able to, oh, I'll figure out what's up with the icons. I was expecting them all, but those are all successful tests, and my code's still good. Let's see, oh, there's all sorts of other goodies I could jump into in the editor, but I'm going to switch out of the editor mode right now, I think, unless anybody's got questions around the editor. I really flew past it, but this, it's got refactoring and code analysis for C# driven by the same engine as on our other C# editor. So Roslin's powering the smarts of the editor. The same VS Core editor is behind both IDEs with just like a Mac native UI on one over the top of that, or WPF Windows native UI on top of the other one. I did mention selection. This one's kind of fun too as a bonus. In VS Mac, if you hit Option Shift up arrow, you can select in like statement level. So here I'm going up from just the one word to a specific statement to the whole line to a block of text on up. And that's kind of a fun tip and trick I like to throw in as well if you like to stay on the keyboard like I do. Yeah.
It's not like in VS Code, it's not HTML component, it's a native component for every operating system.
So the question was is if the editor here is a native component or like JavaScript on VS Code? Yeah, so it is a fully native UI over the editor here, yep. Let's see, any other questions around I've really purposely just hit kind of the basics of the IDE. Now we can start looking at some of the types of application types or projects you could build. Other hands, okay. So let's say I'm feeling really good about this app and I'm ready to move on and like let's explore .NET MAUI. So I want to create a simple, so with MAUI, if you're not familiar, that's the .NET Multi-App UI toolkit. It's used for building out applications that can run on iOS, Android, it could run on Windows, it can run as a Mac Catalyst app specifically. And you can do all that with one shared code base. If you've worked with Xamarin in the past, this is like an evolution or a next step past where Xamarin was. To save on the first build time, I did add a starter project for MAUI that we'll add in here. But in VS for Mac, you could go in, I could say right click and say, whoops, it's in the middle of loading a project, so I can't do it just yet. There we go. VS for Mac, I could go in and say add new project. Let's open back up our Zoom because the resolution's gonna make that a little tough. Okay, I can come in and in our new project dialog, I have options here for building web and console apps, multi-platform apps. That's you can still use Xamarin, like traditional Xamarin for building mobile apps. I can use MAUI focus functionality around iOS and Android, stuff that's been in VS Mac for a while, and then some cloud development stuff. In this case, I have the MAUI, what we call the MAUI workload installed, so I'm able to build out MAUI apps using the different templates, same templates provided on Windows. So this template, this what I have back here in the IDE is the exact same thing as if I select this and just create a new MAUI project. I just did one build already because it saved a little bit of initial build time. So here I'm going to change up in the toolbar which of my projects I want to run. And this is where I could come in and I can select this long list here as a whole bunch of simulators or emulators. So I could build a Mac app, I could run it on an iOS simulator. I've got Android options, I've got one emulator I put on here. In this case, we're going here for the a Mac app and we're just going to run that. Has anybody, a few more people came in since I started. Anybody else in here familiar with VS for Mac already? Or okay, I see a few hands. Have you actively used it or just familiar? Actively use it, okay, great. Oh, I launched the wrong project there as I was talking. We want Maui, not the console. Try that again. So this is the very base Maui app. You can see an app loading here. And in the Hello World for Maui, you click this button and it counts the number of times you've clicked it. Well, we're gonna do basically the same UI, but instead we're gonna throw a field in to be able to put the chord name in and then give me a label to output the chord name, just to show that it wires up. If I switch back here to this application, we're going to open up mainpage.xaml, and here's the markup for my page that we're on. They've got a live visual tree here that gives you a representation of the structure of the UI components running in the application. I had some issues on my machine earlier, but they've got another feature that's like XAML hot reload, so you can make a change to your code and see it apply in the background. So here we go. I'm going to move this window to the side. And we're going to clean up the workspace a little. And so you see as I put a comma in here, the UI on the side is updating. So I can do a little bit of live editing without having to go through another build loop. So in our case, we actually want to put in like I said, we're going to add a field for doing let's just rip the code up and we're just going to put in a field for a chord name. And I'm going to keep this button for now, and we're going to have one label called chord, and this will be where we'll output that. Okay. Now I don't know when I'm making those number of changes or if I got something going on. It's not refreshing here, so we'll actually stop the app for a moment. I will call out as I'm going, you may have spotted up at the bar, it's saying how the top here that it's not supported in this release. The Maui tooling is still in preview in Visual Studio for Mac. So the recommendation is use the latest preview releases, and we'll talk on that in a moment. VS Mac has both a stable release and preview now. I'm just gonna keep doing it in the stable release, which is 17.3. For now, but if I went over to 17.4, which is our new preview release, that's where the work is going to work toward making this kind of what we call a GA release of the Maui tooling. But I'm going to stay in this one place for right now. And we're going to go real minimal. I'm going to navigate to what was the logic of this button. Oh, also, Mac user tip. I'm bouncing my windows around using this great tool called Better Snap Tool. So if you see me jumping the window around, that's what I'm using to pop the window to the left or maximize it without leaving the keyboard. Because like I said, I like to stay on my keyboard. And we're going to take all this and let's see, how are we doing on time? Looking pretty good. We'll go ahead and take from the field on the form that's the chord name field. I'm not going to throw I've been ignoring error detection across the board here, so that'll be obviously one of those first refactorings I'll want to fix later. But we're going to take and integrate with my chord generator. So the first thing I need to do is actually add a reference to the project. So I'm right-clicking on my project, adding a reference. We have a new, in the latest release, we've got an updated UI for this add project reference. That's interesting. Screen, so I can add a reference to that, and now I'll be able to use my chord generator here in this project and say chord generator. I'm going to get a recommendation, little pop-up showed up here on the side. If I click that, it's going to give me the option to use that namespace that I need to be able to call in here. And we're just going to pass in the chord name that we gathered. And finally, I think I made the name, I just called it chord. So there was a chord label on the page at the bottom. We're going to put in here and set it to what the chord generator gives us. Now I do know that when I run this, we're going to get an error. So the IDE is letting me know that I'm actually not able to convert the output, string array, which is what I get back from this chord generator method, is a string array. So I'm going to use string.join, and we're just going to concatenate everything with a comma. And so when I run this now, we should, whoops, it keeps going back to the terminal. Really wants me to stay there. Maui on the Mac. I'll run again. And now this should be a pretty quick build since we're doing incremental changes over what I did. And we'll see that pop up here in just a moment and double check that it worked in the Maui project type. So I mentioned it a moment ago, but if you are working on Xamarin projects, you have the same support you had in Visual Studio 2019 to do Xamarin development in this 2022 release. So that was kind of a minimum we needed to meet with Visual Studio 2022, was to make sure you could still work on the same projects you did before, but just move up to the latest release of Visual Studio. Part of that is because Visual Studio itself, we, from our support model, just support the very latest version of Visual Studio for Mac. So we try to make sure it's really good for backwards compatible as best as we can. Since I was wrong about it being a quick build here, I'll mention one other demo that we're not going to get to today because I just didn't have the capacity on this machine to install it. But game development with Unity is another option. So if you write games and you use Unity, you can actually edit your C# scripts in VS for Mac, and you're able to then debug those scripts as you're working on your game just from within VS for Mac. So that's one other workload the IDE supports. I just, like I said, didn't have the capacity to demo that on here today. So here's our bare bones app. I'll put in my G again, click me, and there's, handy little output from it. Let's throw in a D major chord, and I'll just prove that it is doing something as well. So get a different set of notes back. So there we've got a Maui project we just added in. Well, let's say we want to go on to, which one do I want to hit? Let's add a web project to this. I'm going to do a Blazor. So I'm going to say right-click, add, new project. We'll go back to the web set of projects and go for one of these for a moment. So we've got the same full support for the default templates that come with ASP.NET Core. I only have .NET 6 installed right now, so I'm getting the .NET 6 templates. If I had .NET 7, our latest preview releases are supporting early previews of .NET 7. .NET Core 3.1 is also supported. And another fun one that's in here is these are the same templates from Windows, and it's actually the same templates from the .NET command line. So with the .NET command line, you can also install third-party or other templates, and VS for Mac will pick those up. So if you use the CLI to install a template for like the Uno platform, you can see those appear in VS for Mac and also work with those templates. For us, I'm picking the Blazor WebAssembly project, and I'm going to just take the defaults for demo's sake. And I'm going to name a project chordcalc.web. So this will, let's clean up the space a little bit. So here is our web project. We're going to set it this time as the startup project and just run it so you can see the default. Blazor WASM, this is Blazor WebAssembly. It's a technology that's been in .NET, I think now since 2018 or 2019. It surprised me the other day that I'd forgotten how much time had passed, but it gives you a way to be able to write a web application fully in managed code. And so for example, the base template here lets you increment a counter, kind of pretty straightforward. We're just going to swap in the same thing we did for Maui. I'll just throw in the chord generator as well, just to show the source code in a Blazor WASM project. So I'll click stop and come back here. And I think the one I wanted to be in is I'm just going to take that counter page and we're going to, there we go. Change it up a little bit. So first thing though, I keep forgetting this, but I need to add a reference again to my backend project, and then we'll just call in there from there. And this time, instead of boring you with me writing out the code, I'm just going to take a copy from here. And what I've done is this simply has a label on the page that will be for the chord name. There's a a field next to it. Okay, now avert your eyes for a moment. We're going to change to the light because there it looks like there's an issue with the @ sign, and so it's a little hard to read. Oi, there we go. So this is a little easier to see here. This is binding to a variable that is the chord name down here in my C# source. The button calls a calculate method, and then there's just a field that's putting an output of a chord variable, which is the one to which, again, the chord generator is used, and it just puts it into a variable called chord, and we'll see it on the page. So I'll hit run and just prove that that works out. So the ASP.NET Core template, I just chose Blazor WASM, partially because it's a really easy, quick demo. I didn't have to jump into the JavaScript. I can just stay kind of in the managed code in the Razor world for right now. But we also support templates for ASP.NET Core with MVC, ASP.NET Core Razor pages. They're all in there. And here's our thing. Let's go for an E major this time and hit click. And now we get the output again of this chord generator. So it works in another context now. Same code is working across 2 different project types in the IDE. So any questions? I flew through a couple there. My real goal is kind of give you a feel for the IDE rather than going deep on the different project types. But any questions at this point of what I've gone through or anything you're curious about?
Looks like fonts of everything shared between Visual Studios now.
Or are you saying as far as like the font choice?
Yeah, well, all this, yeah, I see the fonts seem the same as the Visual Studio for Windows.
Yeah, in the editor, that was a change. So your question was if it's the same fonts like on Windows. Yeah, the font size itself specifically, in the editor, we defaulted to these Cascadia code fonts. This was something new recently. So you can come in and by default, it's got Cascadia Mono. If you like Cascadia code with, let's just change for that. This has something called ligatures you'll see in a moment that some people like them, some don't. But we added to include these with VS for Mac by default and then use them as the default, same as Windows. But other fonts, they take from the default font, system fonts for Mac OS. So we still keep menus and the stuff along the sides in these tool windows. Those are just system level fonts to feel like more like a Mac app. Okay. So let's hit on the cloud integration a little bit. Let's say I really want to just throw this on Azure right now. I could come in and I can use our publishing functionality. And in here you have the option to take your web projects and either publish them to Azure or publish them to a folder on your disk and then deploy them wherever you want. I don't need to go all the way with this, but I can show you what the dialog looks like. But you can get the idea. This would be able to deploy an app service using your code. Yeah, there's why I'm not going to go all the way. We're not going to get into authentication right now. We'll just close that. But another point of Azure integration is Azure Functions. If I just open this up, go down to Cloud, you can think of Azure Functions. These are like very special purpose services that you could write to run up in, I call them like serverless solutions. It's not having a more complicated than you're deploying a function that can kind of run and be special purpose up in Azure. Not an expert, so I'm not really speaking to it greatly here, but it's another point of integration, and functions can be set up in different ways. You could trigger them with a call in the browser, so an HTTP trigger, which is the easiest for kind of initial debugging. But they can also be associated to run at certain schedules. They're triggered off of an action in a queue in Azure, so there's a number of things you can do. In this version of VS for Mac, a new thing we did was add support for Azure Functions v4, and this allows Azure Functions to run on .NET 6. We just now added in our preview support for Azure Functions on .NET 7, and those also support, the .NET 7 support, I believe, required isolated mode with Azure Functions, and so that's now an option if you're familiar with that and it's something you know you need. We're just going to name, I'm very creative with my names, so I'm just going to be chord calc for this function name. No authentication to get going, we're just going to set one up real quick. And hit create. So this is what an Azure function looks like in C#. And if we run this, Our terminal will come up here in a moment, and it'll show us a URL we can access to be, I keep imagining the IDE has a feature it doesn't have, which it's selecting the thing I just created to run. There we go. Now I just set the startup project to be the Azure Functions project. We'll run that, and then we'll see just what the default looks like. So the Azure Functions, this is going to give me just an HTTP endpoint URL I can open in my browser and fire off the function. By default, it's a really straightforward example. Let's see. There we go. So it gives me this endpoint that I can call. Just going to copy that. We'll open this browser. And if you pass in a name, it simply outputs what you gave it. So I can easily adapt this for the chord calculator right now. I just needed to take a chord and away we go. And save us time on you watching me again. Code all that out. We'll go ahead and copy. I think I've got that. It's another app I like, this copy clip app here for some little clipboard history, but you know what? I don't think I copied that one yet, and this is straightforward to write, so let's just do it real fast. I'm going to keep what's already there, and we're just going to take a chord in. And we've seen this other code before where it's going to take from my chord generator. Oh, I don't have the project included, so let's add the reference again. Okay, that's done. So there's the back end. And now we'll just call the same thing we've been doing all along, get the major chord. And close off the line. Should actually be about as easy as that for a quick test. Now with Azure Functions, you can take these and you can work on them locally. I'm going to throw in a breakpoint, and you can actually debug these the functions. So same as all the other project types I showed you, anywhere you're working on the C# source code, you can use the debugger. Unity was the same thing. If I worked on a Unity app and had C# scripts, I can go ahead and debug those right in VS for Mac. And so this time, let's pick an F major chord. And I'm thinking I have an error possibly in my code. Let's see. It ran, okay, yeah. So it gave me the string that I expect. So here's just hitting our breakpoint. And I didn't show all these windows before, but with debugging in VS for Mac, you've got a lot of the same. Oh, this app keeps losing my zoom. You've got a lot of the same stuff you typically expect for debugging. Step in to step out. Locals to look at the state of your app. A watch window, working with call stacks. All the basics, standard stuff is there with the debugger in each of the project types we just looked at. And we'll just let that run. And then one last thing to see that, oh, I actually just outputted the name of the chord. So you saw on the debugger I had that there. Now I'm ready to change the code, and I could also output the chord itself, but I won't make you go through another run of the code just for that. So there was Azure Functions. So now we've added a web front end. I already had my unit tests running with the project. Got a simple MAUI application, all sorts of fun things there. The last thing I could do here would be take and commit these, and I'll show you here. This is the new Get Changes window in 2022 for Mac. So previously we had a whole different way of working with Git source control. Now Git Changes window is similar to what you might be familiar with on Windows. Bring in very focused tool window you can have to the side, and you can go ahead and use it to coordinate all your efforts around pulling and pushing your changes. There's options for, I could actually take all these items and stage them and coordinate my, oh, I think there was a window sizing problem. It's still there. 1 second. There it is. Well, that's weird. So I can stage my changes. I could come in and actually say if I want to just go ahead and stage and push right away. So that's a whole new window coming into VS for Mac, and this tees up a little of where we're going forward, is bringing more and more Git functionality into the IDE, building on top of the stuff in Visual Studio on Windows to bring on into the product. So that would finish off our building out a kind of this basic project. I added a bunch of front ends on here. Something definitely happened to the screen, so I'm going to quit it and reopen it real quick. But those were, again, a rapid tour through the IDE. Any questions? Otherwise, I'll focus also a little bit more on some of what's next, or even a few other just random new things that don't all fit into the one demo. Cool. Now, out of the folks, well, actually, I think there are just a few of you using VS for Mac. Today, are using it mainly for mobile? Do you use it for web? What kinds of scenarios do you go for?
Mostly web APIs.
Web APIs? Okay. Xamarin? Excellent. Ooh, nice. It'd be interesting to talk a little bit more about how that experience went. We've got some things we're looking at coming on the Blazor. Oh, so there was a, I know as far as I might not have heard, one person's working on web APIs, another have been doing some Xamarin work, and then like full Blazor application server-side and client-side. So with Blazor, you do a lot of work in a Razor editor, and the Razor editor in VS for Mac today is an area that we've got to definitely clean up. It's an older version. It's not the same editor in Visual Studio on Windows that's moved forward, so we're doing a lot of work to actually enable using the same Razor editor from Visual Studio on Windows, which is in a great state right now. So we want to bring that into VS for Mac and replace the current Razor editor, which is sort of got a lot of some known pain points to that one. Another new one I can throw in here was, we've had a lot of requests for something called user secrets. And this is in .NET, I can come in and, now this was added in Visual Studio for Mac, so I can go in and choose this Manage User Secrets menu. And it'll open up a JSON file you can use for storing things like a connection string. It's the private details that you don't want to commit to your source code. Connection string being the way, all the credentials to connect to, say, a SQL Server database. Things you don't want to live in your source code. .NET has this concept of user secrets. And the way this works is if I highlight on this tab, you'll see there's a file path on disk here that, that doesn't zoom over, weird. For .NET, this puts it in like a private .Microsoft folder at the root of your user directory on the Mac, and then in there it's got a GUID in the file name, and then you can put your secrets in there, and it's something that doesn't get committed with your project. But before, it was a little bit of a pain to manually set up because you had to know, how do I get, what's the GUID that I want to put in there? And instead, VS for Mac, when you say Manage User Secrets, will do the work of adding in generating a GUID for you here of the user secrets ID and just put the file on disk, and then you can go in and add, say, anything like my secret key. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then in your source code for your project, you'd be able to access, I'm going to a spot where you wouldn't put this, but it makes for a simple example. I'm going to the wrong place right now, but you can basically refer to configuration in your ASP.NET app or in a .NET Core app and say, from configuration, get me that secret key. And it'll just do the work of using .NET's user secret support. And VS for Mac just helps kind of one of those little paper cut items. It's a pain to set up the first time. That was something new that got added in that a number of people have been asking us about. Maybe final thing as far as the only area I haven't dived in too much for what's new in the IDE, just to give you a little peek at it, would be the preferences area. So this is one spot that was all older macOS UI, not macOS UI, cross-platform UI in the previous release. So it's a whole new preferences functionality in VS for Mac. And we also were able to do some little things of enabling some features. I'm trying to remember some that would be a good example. Yeah, there's a whole lot of different options in here that it's a good place to explore if you're new to it, or every now and then you want to just change it up and see some other stuff you might be able to do with the IDE. You could come in and turn on a few more features and play around. It's a nice way to make the IDE your own. But there were a few I think we fixed up that we found in the process of preferences that maybe were there that didn't do anything before, and we fixed those up in the new IDE. So a few little bonus items in there. Color theme support has been in here for a bit, and it's some functionality where you could take VS settings files from Windows if you use those in the past and bring them to VS Mac, or some TextMate theme files. You can play around and customize the editor colors a little. But I'd also call out preview features is always an interesting one. This is where we're experimenting with new stuff in the IDE. Your mileage may vary, as we say. They may not all work great because they're early prototypes, but like this show errors and warnings in solution and get changes window, this feature we're playing around with, I could get, say, let's put an error in my code. And I think the reason it's a preview feature right now is that it does require a build before you see them. But now it calls out here over on the side that there was an error in this file, even if I had that file closed. And I can start seeing then from the solution window some are, where are there errors in my source code, or even warnings across the whole project. And likewise, that shows up in the Get Changes window. Let's go to this view of all files. And you see a red label here, and it tells us before you commit this file, you can see that, oh, I've got an error in there, maybe a warning that I better address before I commit it. It's a really nice thing in VS Code. It's one we're experimenting in. VS for Mac is a new thing to try out and make it easier to find errors without going into the build loop so often. So I could hit on other tips and tricks and things, but let's just talk on the space of what's next and roadmap. I'd mentioned Unity, so I did leave this open to give you a few quick visuals, but if you wanted to do 3D apps using VS and going through your Mac, you've got full debugging support for building out the C# code in Unity, and this gives you an idea of some of the stuff like you can attach to your project and run it. The debugger's there to catch you with the usual debugging features. And there are also some built-in helpers, like Unity has these concept of Unity event functions, things that are specific to Unity that fire on certain events. There's like wizard tooling or UI tooling in VS for Mac to make it easier to add those and search for those and add them in, like run something when there's a collision. Those are examples of some of the Unity-specific functionality in the IDE. So that's just one more workload that kind of runs, and we've now at that point touched on all the workloads in the IDE. Now, looking out at what's next, this is, I'll share a link to this page up on the last slide in a little bit here, but this is our roadmap for right now where we look to update what are we looking at for the next 6 to 12 months. And so the top of all this is improving quality of the IDE. It can be death by 1,000 paper cuts in some areas. Like, well, we know unit testing has got a number of rough points to it. So we're really focusing on what can we do to improve the quality of the product. It's all based off what we hear from developers like yourselves, from our own internal use of the product. So if you're going along, you run into issues, or you have a suggestion, please go on up to this help menu and then use these report a problem and provide a suggestion menus. And we are on the back end pulling these in with other bugs we find. We've got reports running where we try to stay on top of the highest voted items on the developer community. We look at the issues coming in from you, and we can even you can tell on some of them if it's bad enough. It doesn't matter how many votes there are. This is obviously terrible. And we're working to clean that up, get it in a good state, stay on top of those. That is above all what we're really focused on. So you'll see the 17.4 release that's in preview right now is going to be light on features, heavier on stabilizing the quality of the product. But you can see on the roadmap here, this will call out a few things that we've got that we're working on or that we've just delivered. So if I use it real quick because it hits on a few favorites, one of these was the ability to take windows and be able to drag and dock them side by side. That has come back into the 17.3 release that just came out. So if you've been using 17.0, you may have missed this functionality from before. That's something that was highly voted and we brought back as one example. Whoops. Another one would be the regular expressions toolkit. This is I'm not going to put you through me writing a regular expression in front of you right now, but using the regular expression toolkit, it's been a long time in VS for Mac, so we moved it to native UI, and it gives you some little quick reference for common things and working with regular expressions, and a nice NID experience for writing out a regex and putting in some input text and testing out your regular expressions without having to hop out to, say, a regex tester website if you prefer. There's a minor one too, but like our hex editor. I don't think it's too heavily used, but that's another example of UI that hadn't moved to native yet. That's coming, that's just about done, and that'll round out the stuff that we needed to move to native UI. And from here on, it's all the base stuff is ported to native Mac OS UI, and now we're working on just building on top of that. New functionality, bug fixing. So I think the last thing we can hit here, because I believe we still got a moment or two, yeah, is let me talk about preview releases, because this is new on from how we used to do them. So now on your machine, after you've installed 2022, and then you can also install a preview release, and now we'll put down a preview version of Visual Studio as a separate app. So you no longer have what we did before, where you go in, you have one Visual Studio app, and it's either our stable channel or preview channel. And it's, or you have to do some other tricks to get them side by side, as we say. But now we fully support having both a preview off to the side and then having the stable version on one machine, so you don't have to do so much, go through so much just to try out the new functionality and maybe reset your normal environment. So here I'm going to open up the preview IDE. And there's not as much. This is our 17.4 preview that just went out. This is actually the main branch from our dev team, so this is even earlier than anybody's got it so far, but there's only a couple things I would mention in it. Not too much to show off right now. It's got some layout things we're working out here. But yeah, you can see work going on, and something else is happening as far as working with our layout of our solution window on the back end's getting cleaned up. Also will help us address a number of things with that. But extensions, I was just going to touch on this because the team's done some fun work around the extension window, bringing back the ability to search for extensions, and you can use things like the Vim extension is a very popular one for VS for Mac. I also opened this because it's a common question. Hey, can we get more extensions for Visual Studio for Mac? And that one is more of a, not yet, but we hear it, and we're looking at where we can go with extensions. Our team puts out a few little fun ones here and there to experiment with it. But our goal is definitely something to start looking at, maybe with our, I'd say it'd be closer to maybe our 2020, if there's going to be a 2023 or 18.0. Those are the sorts of things we're starting to think of early now. So I say this to you as a point of, if you're really interested in extensions, you can go out to our developer community site, like the provide a suggestion under the help menu, and lend your voice toward those things you want to see both. And then we're taking that into account for the big stuff like extensions, or maybe smaller things like certain specific bug fixes. It's my biggest call for requests from everybody. Another one that's kind of this is asking for any help if you feel up to it, which would be there's an option in here for enable LSP editor. It stands for Language Server Protocol. This is an underlying technology that powers the editors like in VS Code, and we're moving in the Visual Studio product to using LSP to power other editors like the Razor editor. So when I mentioned there's a new Razor editor we're looking at, one of the first steps is actually supporting LSP. So this is an option. There's nothing new it'll give you right now, but we'd love feedback if anybody's up to trying it out, turn it on, and then just use the editors like you normally would. But definitely report extra issues there, because it's changing how some of the editors work. And I'm sure over the next few releases we'll also start to bring in that new Razor editor as another preview feature. When you're in the preview releases too, by the way, you can always go check for updates, and this is where you can take down a new preview release. So in this case, I've got another build I could grab now that we would have just put out. So I think that is, yeah, and there's another one too on the last ones I could hit that are further out Hot Reload is one that's really looking at .NET Hot Reload, which lets you do in more places like in MAUI, including the C# code you edit, or ASP.NET Core as you're working in those projects. Hot Reload lets you push more right on out to the browser or into the running app without having to go through build at all. That's a place where exploring and experimenting. I don't see it coming into 17.4, which is the next release, but we're actively working on that as a goal for as soon as we can after the 17.4 release. And very random, there's some other stuff too, like the installer is now running fully natively, or it will be in a couple releases. In an upcoming preview release, the installer runs natively on Apple's M1 processor, and that was a common request too, is that if the IDE runs natively, I don't want to have to turn on Apple's Rosetta technology at all, which enables non-native apps to run on M1. We're now going to all the way through support native M1. Go ahead. I see a question back there.
Really that's the only thing that I have with the debug process. I mean, I'll use it, but I always do a .NET Watch run from I've never really enjoyed any of the in-app features.
Oh, so are you saying that you like using the .NET Watch Run command for sort of the hot reload and prefer that style?
Exactly, because I've never been any other way to do that. So if you guys include that option, that would be really awesome. But I'm just going to bypass it.
Okay. Great. Yeah, and the experience we'd look at would be at least the same as .NET Watch Run as far as what it enables, but having a button in the UI to be able to push your code out to, or to do the hot reload kind of a watched experience there. So that's great to hear. It'll be similar to the Visual Studio Windows experience. I got like a little fire icon you can also click on to do stuff with hot reload. So let me go, PowerPoint kept crashing, but let's just open that back up real quick with a few links that I can leave you with. So there's just a few links as far as where you can get the latest stable release. So that's our version 17.3, the preview release 17.4. And then there's a link where you can see all of our blog posts that talk in depth about what's new in the releases. And there's little things here and there that we catch in those blog posts that I didn't call out today. And then the roadmap link. You could also, anybody wants to reach out to me, I will live edit this and give you my Twitter handle. So it's at jmathieson, and that is a good way to start a conversation as well. So we'll leave that up for a moment, but otherwise I'll just switch over to the survey screen in a second here so you all have that link, because I would love your feedback leading into that. Like I teed up at the beginning, I am going to do a version of this talk in Orlando, and so would love feedback on, what might we cover differently? It's going to be even a shorter portion tag teamed with what's new in Visual Studio on Windows, so I'd love to know would be the core things you'd like to see in the VS for Mac talks going forward. With that, any questions from anybody? Any other things I can answer? Anything around VS for Mac for sure? I see one over here.
I missed the first part of the talk. Is there a professional or enterprise version of VS for Mac?
Yeah, so the question was if there's a professional enterprise version of VS for Mac. And so, yeah, it's the same licensing as Visual Studio on Windows. So it's one version of the IDE, but your license is enabled by your sign-in. So if you have a professional subscription to Visual Studio, you've also got a professional subscription to VS for Mac. It's all included. So, any other questions? Well, great. I will switch over to the survey slide to leave us on. But thanks everybody for coming. This was really fun. First time I've chatted in front of a crowd in some time, I guess like 3 or 4 years maybe. I've lost track, but it's fun to get out here again and chat with you all. Feel free to come on down, ask other questions if you like as well. I'll be around for a little bit. And yeah, thanks for coming. Have a good rest of the event. Take care.